Welcome, everyone, to our webinar on the magic of healing. I've looked forward to doing this webinar for quite a long time. And I'm going to just check I'm getting a technical message here. Thank you. I'm being reminded by someone out there to record, and I am. I've been looking forward to doing this webinar for quite a long time as I gradually settled in on what really is the magic of this work that I do with people. And of course, there's several elements to that magic that makes the work for me very special, and I think very special for the people I work with because of the changes that take place in their lives. But I was asking myself the question, what is it that's really unique about what I do? Because as I've looked at what other people do, the things they've written or the things they say online, I can see many similarities and not a lot of real differences between them. And of course, one of the differences is that I am one of the very few physicians, now retired of course, who have come to this kind of work. And of course, as I've said many times, this is very much the fulfillment of my dharma as a healer, because as a physician, I was largely a technician. I had to do things correctly. And then if the body was willing, then it got well. And so I was dealing primarily with physical illnesses, trauma and such, infections. And, most of the time people would get well if I did the technical part of that correctly. But the really fun part of what I do in relation to my having been a physician is that now I can affect healing from a very subtle level, from the subtlest level of our existence, and produce delightful changes so that people are healthier and happier and their well-being is very much improved. And I do that at all stages of life and with all manner of problems that arise in people, whether they be physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual. It doesn't really matter because at the level at which I'm doing the work, those things are all one. And I can affect the gross physical level just by working at the subtle level. And indeed, I find this work very fulfilling because of the success, but also because everything can be taken care of at once. We don't have to have multiple specialists dealing with a person's problems, someone dealing with the physical aspect, somebody dealing with the psychological aspect, somebody explaining things to the patient or talking over with the patient or, what's going on in their life in terms of the events that are taking place, the physical problems that they're facing. And we don't need a clergyman to deal with the spiritual aspect, if clergymen can actually do that. I think a few of them do. Some of them I've met, I think, do, but not very many. So the work is very gratifying to me on that level, and it's really quite magical because beyond the simple practice of healing as we did it in medicine, there is this subtle dimension that we work in that unfolds all the transformation. And I don't really have to do anything. It's just a matter of attention. There are some techniques that I use to produce effects, particularly on the physical level when we're producing physical changes, treating an infection, for instance. We may have to chase the little bugs out. So there are things that I can do which are helpful in that kind of way. And there's that sense there that I'm doing something to somebody, much as I had when I was a physician and I would do things. But the real essence of it is just using the coherent attention with intention that certain positive changes should take place. The work gets more interesting and more exciting and is more magical when we're dealing with things that are of a deeper karmic nature, and we actually have to change the karma of what is involved. And that often means going back to finding why certain things are happening. And that means going back not only in a present lifetime, but often going back into past lifetimes, parallel universes, other dimensions. And I say that sort of, off the cuff, glibly like that, because it really is that simple. We just access those different points and look into the history of what's going on. And it's not really about analysis, though. It's not like modern work, modern psychology or modern physiology and medicine. It's just accessing there was some point back there, some lifetimes back, where there was some difficulty. And I get a sense of what that difficulty might be. Nature is kind to me, and I don't have to experience the trauma that people went through. I just get a sense of what it was most of the time. And the same with physical illness. It's not necessarily that it lights up like, oh, here's this physical illness. It's that, oh, there's this disturbance of energy, and we just treat that like any other disturbance of energy. We just, have ways of fixing that, mostly by just putting attention on it. So there's a magic in that. You go in there with, we go in there with an intention. And at that subtle level, we just produce changes, shifts that take place in the energy, and then things get better. And so it has a very magical quality. It's magical, too, because we never know what's going to show up. And that's always, to me, one of the great wonders of the work that I do. Really don't know what is going to show up. It just happens. And it doesn't always hold any obvious meaning. I was working with someone just recently who had an issue with the heart, a rhythm problem, and they wanted to know what I found, what was the cause of their problem. And I said, well, I don't know that I can really explain why what I saw was the cause of your problem, but it was associated with your problem. And it may have been symbolic, or it may have just been the way I perceived it. But what I saw was really quite fascinating, because there was a kind of very tight, I'm going to do this with my hands. There was a very tight ball of energy like this. But it was a shell. It was hollow inside. And it was very compact and hard and prickly on the outside, which was an interesting thing. I'd never seen that before. And what that had to do with an arrhythmia, I still don't know. But it had something to do with the arrhythmia. There was some pattern of energy there that was affecting his physical structure. And so I started to work with that. And it was a stubborn little thing. It didn't want to transform. And so I had to be with it for quite a long time, and with a level of acceptance that it was just going to be there. There was a karmic lesson involved here. It was kind of heavy-duty stuff. The first session, I didn't even get to the karma. I was just working on the physical structure, and was able to soften it up some. I also saw what to me looked like a worm-like structure that was eating away at the inside of the heart sphere. That was clearly some impulse of energy that had come from something that that person had been involved in, probably in a previous lifetime. I was picking up something from the third lifetime back. And I never did find out what the worm was or represented, and it didn't matter. We just invited the worm to stop what it was doing, and it did actually eventually do that. And ultimately what happened was the shell got bigger and softer, but it was still there. And I went back and worked on it some more today, and got it to be quite bigger and softer. And it was curiously hollow inside, meaning I wasn't picking up vital energy in there. It was like dull. And so that will be something for a third session. And I'm relaying this in a way because it is often the case that things seem to unfold a bit like peeling off layers of an onion. And so there's a surface layer, and I work on that, and then I get in deeper on the next time, deeper in the next time. And those are not necessarily separate sessions. It's just I'll work on something, and then I'll feel like, oh, we're getting deeper into this. And as I said, we started to work on some of the karmic issues that were arising there, and we'll continue to work on those until it's all cleared up. I did get some feedback that the rhythm problem seemed to actually go away, but it does that on its own sometimes. So we can't take any credit for that quite yet. But I deal with many, many such problems. The first really big thing that I worked on, actually was the second thing. The first really big thing I worked on, and it was a huge lesson for me, was someone who had cancer and was dying. And I went to work on them, and I really didn't know much about what I was doing, and I didn't have any of the knowledge and techniques that I have today. I had only just some rudimentary knowledge at that point and practically no experience. And I was working with them, and I said, you don't actually have to die. This problem that you have, the energy around this problem seems to be quite malleable, and I think we could change that. And if you had the will to live, I think you could. And the person said to me, no, I've lived a full life, and I'm happy with what I've done, and it's time for me to go. And I had to ponder that one for a while, thought about it overnight, thought about it a lot, actually, overnight. And I eventually made peace with the fact that my goal as a healer wasn't going to be to heal this person in the usual sense of the word. Their illness wasn't going to change because I was encouraging it to do so. And so I went back to the person. I said, well, what is it you want me to do if you don't want me to cure this? And they said, well, I want you to make sure that I get enlightened, that I achieve my spiritual mission in this lifetime in the short time that I have left, which was a pretty big assignment, actually, and particularly since I had absolutely no experience in doing such a thing. But I went to work on them, and it just unfolded that way. And the send-off was absolutely magnificent. And I have no real doubt that that person succeeded in achieving the evolution of consciousness that they wished to achieve. So the second big experience that I had was someone who had a viral infection of a chronic, I'm sorry, it was not a viral infection. They had an autoimmune disorder of a chronic nature, as autoimmune disorders usually are. And it was quite severe. And they were not expected to live without radical medical intervention, medical and surgical intervention. And they came to me having just gotten out of the hospital, and they were quite ill. And I went to work on them, and we worked, I think, 3 times a week at first, and then twice a week, and eventually once a week, and then once every couple of weeks, and then down to once a month. So there were a lot of sessions, and I was still very new at it. So that's one of the reasons why it took so many sessions. And gradually, the energy around the problem that they had shifted. It wasn't anything sudden. It took a lot of time, but the problem went away. And what happened was that their health started to return, and the damaged organ regenerated, and it wasn't completely normal, but it was working again. And the laboratory values that the doctors were monitoring gradually improved. And I suggested to this person that they ask their doctors if they had ever seen anyone recover from this kind of autoimmune disorder, that particularly they were literally at the terminal stage. And the report back that I got was that no, the doctors had never seen it happen, but they had heard of it. And so they kind of went like, oh, this is one of those really rare cases where they just get better. And working with me was the only alternative work that person was doing. They were otherwise doing the medical therapy, which they very much needed because they were extremely ill. And they got their life back. And after, I can't remember, it was a year and a half, I think, they basically were functioning 100% again, and were able to resume their career. So life went on for them, and they were, of course, very happy. And well, anyway, that was basically the conclusion of the story. I haven't checked in with them in about a year or so, so it's time to check in again and make sure that they're still doing very well. But it's been years, and the last I checked, um, they were they were completely healthy. So that's the kind of work that happens magically, marvelously, and brings fulfillment, of course, to my client and to me. Um, but that's not the only magic. It's not just that things happen, that shifts take place effortlessly, you could say, and very, very thoroughly. There's also the magic that comes um, of finding that, as I said before, finding things that just show up that I could never have imagined. I'm actually not a particularly imaginative person. That is to say, I don't have much of a fantasy life where I can envision things and all kinds of magical things show up. My dreams are pretty boring and often repetitious. Um, but when I do this work, all kinds of wonderful things come up. And I am able to do that or allow that to happen because of training that I had, where I was told to just do the thing. And the phrase actually that was used was hallucinate out of your mind. Um, and it's kind of like that. It's like really wild things show up sometimes, and we don't interpret them. We don't try to judge them in any way or try to figure out what they mean. We just go with what shows up because the process is taking place and we're just a witness to that process. And that's very delicious in a way because it takes a lot of the responsibility off me. I don't have to be um, analytic like I was when I was a physician, and study numbers on charts and try to figure out what they meant and interpret what was going on in the physiology, and then do the what I thought were the appropriate things to make things get better in that way and make the numbers get better. So don't have to do any of that. It just being in there with intention and attention with intention, and then everything just unfolds naturally. There's another level, though, and this is the one that I think is pretty unique for the kind of work that I do. I don't know other healers that are doing exactly this, and that is that when I'm working with someone, we go to, as I said earlier, we go to a very deep level, a level of the subtlest vibrations of pure consciousness. And at that level, the sense of separateness disappears. There is a sense of oneness. When I first started thinking about this, I was thinking of a shared space. But when you use the word shared, you're holding the notion that there's two separate beings, two separate people involved. And so I shifted that because it isn't a sense of separateness, it's a sense of oneness. So instead of shared space, I say it's one space. I use a hyphen, one hyphen space. It's one space, operating in one space in an intimate connection with the person, so that I know everything that needs to be known about what's going on. I can interpret the physical level, the mental level, the emotional level, the spiritual level. You might say the cosmic level, that is to say, what the lessons are that nature is trying to get a person to learn, or the karma that's being worked out. They're two similar, but not quite the same things. Many times things happen to us, they're not punishment, so to speak, for things that we did in the past that were harmful to others or harmful to ourselves. But there are lessons that we have set up to learn in this lifetime by the particular qualities of our physiology and our mind and our emotions. And these are things that can be seen often from astrology studies, but other than some Vedic performances or other kinds of astrological things, that the astrology tells us what's going to happen to us or why things are happening to us or happened to us. but it doesn't give us much in the way of remedies. Um, and overcoming karma can be very difficult. And what I'm finding is that I can pick up what the karmic influences are and what the life lesson things are, and can work with those and bring a change or a shift in the way those energies are playing out in the world, so that the lessons get learned on that subtle level and the suffering doesn't need to continue. That is not always possible to end, because some karmas are very deeply etched in what's going to play out in a person's life, but many of them are much softer and amenable to intervention. Um, I'm going to tell a story that's relevant to somebody in the room, but I won't say who. And they had actually paid for someone else to have a series of sessions with me. And when I went in and looked at what was going on, I could see that the energy was very deeply disturbed, and that they knew they were ill, and I knew that they were very ill. But of course, I wasn't going to say that because I don't want to destroy hope. But what I found was that my work was very definitely furthering their evolution. Their body had gone as far as it could go in this lifetime. And there were certain things that they needed to learn that they weren't going to be able to work out by living it. And so I went to work on the subtle level to work out those particular lessons, in the hope that they would not have to come back in another incarnation and work on those things. I never told you that, did I? And so that was how my work played out in that particular situation. And, on the one hand, superficially, it was a little bit disappointing, because I would have loved to have saved their life from this particular illness and changed their whole karma, but it just wasn't going to happen. And I've actually had enough experience with that kind of thing now that I can accept that without a lot of grief or sense that I didn't succeed. But I've actually felt really good about it, because I know that on the subtle level, those karmas had been worked out, and they would not create a great burden in some future incarnation. So that's another example of the kind of work that I do. I'm just going to check the time here. How are we doing? 26 after. Okay, so we're getting close to that. So that's really the third level of the magic that I do. It's that magic of the interconnection, working in one space, or as I like to say, one space, to know completely and obviously very deeply what is going on in another person. And part of the joy of that for me personally is that when I work on someone, I'm also working on myself, because we're all one. And in some of the previous webinars, I've talked about how I will work within myself, and that will affect all the other people. And when we move into the group clearing session here in just a few minutes, we will be doing that kind of process and merging together in one. And this has enormous implications about how we relate to people, not just when we're in a healing session like I do with people, but just in day-to-day life. If one can shift into that level of operation where you're literally one with another person, then you can say present. Both people are present, and then there's this sense of connection, this sense of being with a person that just merges into that experience of oneness. It's just oneness, and it's silent and it's blissful, and it's exquisitely beautiful. And so the webinar that we'll do next month will be on living oneness, and bringing relationships to their ultimate fulfillment. And I will describe in that webinar, I'll describe some techniques that people can use to get into that space, and particularly to get into that space when you're really aware that you're not in that space, so that you can get out of the level of interaction and suffering that's going on the surface level, and find that deepest level, that truest level where you're in touch with the what Maharishi called creative intelligence, that guides life and directs life, and just enables one to flow with life, flow with consciousness, um, and just enjoy the experience, whatever it may be. So with that, I'm going to see if there's any questions. Click on the chat function here, and seeing no questions, if there are any questions here or outside, I'm happy to entertain those now. Otherwise, we'll end this part of the presentation and we'll move on into the group clearing session. Okay, I'm going to